Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by with the Season 5 update here in Warzone. Of course, we saw a pretty significant meta update. We saw a lot of buffs in specific to a handful of weapons and weapon categories, a few nerfs here and there as well. And today I wanted to go through the entirety of the Season 5 meta update and break down the weapons you want to be on the lookout for after the patch. What weapons are going to be in absolute meta, some more top tier, really solid choices, what's maybe a little bit more competitive, and then those you want to shy away from. And of course, we're starting first with our two new weapons, the STG and the Static HV. And the STG is a very, very easy pick here. This is an absolute meta rifle. Low recoil, great damage, great velocity, good magazine capacity. Like, it's checking every single box just fine. The thing is utterly phenomenal. Love the feel of it. Have been playing a lot with it as of late. Thing is easily in the absolute meta category. The Static HV is honestly pretty solid. When you are looking at the meta SMGs, you're going up against things like the Superi, the Horus, and while this thing is really competitive, all right, post-edit Zach here. Funny enough, COD timing, as I was editing this video, sim.gg ended up updating their stats, and with this, the range on the Static HV is way better than what I initially tested in game. Thing is nuts. So we absolutely have to bump this thing up into absolute meta. The STG and the Static HV both insanely good in their own respect. STG in the mid-range just thrives. It does fall off some over range, but its close range and its aggressiveness, its recoil is all still so good that it's clearly meta. And the Static HV, while it is a little bit clunky feeling and some of the attachments are odd on it, I mean, its range is so consistent and it's relatively low recoil that kind of makes up for some of the weird elements of it. Safe to say, Season 5's Battle Pass has some very valuable weapons in it. Absolutely worth going through and unlocking because they are really good, all things considered. Now, that being said, off to my right, I've also got my handy dandy list of notes of everything that ended up changing as far as weapon balancing. So all the buffs and nerfs, and now we can go through and talk about these individually and how this affects the weapons. So first up with the rifles, the MCW ended up getting a new buff to the lower torso that makes it similar to the upper torso, which makes it a lot more forgiving for one, but also helps out with the TTK some there too. It was already an absolute meta because of the conversion kit, but really the base MCW has been feeling better and better and better lately. Truly now is one of the top rifle options, which personally I love to see. This one kind of took me by surprise, but the SVA, which for whatever reason I didn't have an absolute meta, yes, it's absolute meta, especially in semi-auto, and its max range got a buff, so now if you're running and gunning with this thing, like close range, resurgence maybe, it's going to be even better there. So the SVA, already a great rifle, got even better. This is one that I'm actually very excited about. The BAL 27 got a max range buff and a pretty drastic recoil buff as well, that to me absolutely jumps this thing up into top tier. Also, while we're here, the Holger's got to go up to absolute meta easily. But anyways, BAL 27, its big thing was it just felt terrible to use. Now, it still does have kind of an awkward TTK because of the fire rate consistency. Obviously, it starts slow and then goes way faster. When you're hitting shots in the way faster fire rate, the TTK is nuts. If you're hitting shots in those first four or whatever, it's more mid-tier. So that's really its only balance now, but this thing is definitely way better than it was before. Really like to see that. Another case of a great weapon becoming even better, the MTZ 556 got its like fourth or fifth buff in a row, mid-range buff there. So it's going to be even more effective in the mid-range there as far as its distance goes, so even better than it was pre-update. Already was a phenomenal rifle. And then kind of a surprising one, the M4, which I actually had to search for because we never talk about it. This ended up getting a long-range damage buff, a mid-range damage buff, and then a close range buff as well, which quite frankly bumps it up some. I was surprised to see the M4 getting this much of a buff. It's still an MW2 gun, so it's probably hindered from being absolute meta ever because of how they feel with their visual recoil, their shake, some of their attachment selections. But as far as it goes, like, it's able to compete with the 545, the STB, these other really solid MW2 rifles that a lot of them have found themselves in top tier because of certain buffs over time, and the M4 finally gets its turn there too, so that's cool to see as well. Now, the BAS B got a slight max range buff, nothing too substantial there. It's just still going to be a competitive battle rifle. And then also the TAC V, another kind of surprising one. We've talked about this thing having a crazy broken TTK. They actually buffed the leg modifier on this. Thing is, again, MW2 weapon, also a much higher skill gap gun, so it's kind of limited. But for those specifically very good at semi-auto guns, or you just really love the feel of the TAC V, it's more dangerous than ever, and it already was a very dangerous weapon, just very clunky and very awkward. Another solid update here, the AMR9 ended up seeing a max range buff and then a mid-range buff as well, so it's got better range now. Its damage is still kind of mid in like the close range area. It's not going to be the most aggressive SMG, but it's definitely creeping back into that sort of sniper support area there, so that's nice. It's definitely not as bad and as useless as it was for a little while there. Then it was great, got hard nerfed, and now it's kind of back up towards where it was before it got hard nerfed. Now the FJX Horus, one of our absolute meta SMGs, basically just got a damage range across the board. So its close damage got nerfed, its mid-range got nerfed. It also got a slight sprint to fire nerf as well. That said, thing is still very good. It just doesn't have as much range as it did before, but whether you're using the conversion kit or the base weapon, it's still going to be a great SMG, just a little bit more checked than it was back in like season 4 reloaded. Now the Supri, really what everyone had their eyes on here, did catch a nerf, but it was only to its mobility, and they weren't very drastic nerfs. So really, truly, the Supri is still the peak SMG. It's number one. Its damage, its TTK, while isn't always the best, it is absolutely as competitive as it gets. You can build this thing out to be a rifle as well as an SMG, which is just absurd. That probably needs to be nerfed. But yeah, Supri is still goated. And by the way, as we are breaking down all the weapons here today, if you are new to the channel or maybe you have not subscribed yet, let's change that. Every single day, I got you covered with news, updates, patch notes, and meta breakdowns. So if you want to guarantee you're always up to date, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoy this video or if you find it helpful, be sure to drop a like. It really does help the channel grow. Now the WASP-9 actually caught a slight leg modifier nerf, and this will be impactful if you're hitting those lower body shots, but if you're fighting close range, which that's where you should be fighting with the Wasp, you're probably going to be fine to land upper body shots or like torso shots for the majority of your hits, so it won't have a drastic impact on the TTK, but it does make it slightly worse. And it's kind of strange that the Horus and the WASP-9 both got damage nerfs when they're the best competitors to the Supri, and the Supri didn't get a damage nerf. But anyways, all three of those are still absolute meta subs. Two of them are just noticeably worse in terms of damage and or range, whereas one is just noticeably worse with movement there. So some strange balancing, but nonetheless not going to be anything that is like utterly game changing. Hey everyone, real quick, just want to shout out my friends over at G Fuel. It's heating up outside. We've got COD updates dropping almost every single week. We've got Black Ops 6 on the horizon, so whatever you might be looking for from G Fuel, they've got you covered. Hydration tubs to make sure that if you're going out and about in your daily life, you are hydrated, you're good to go there. If you're sitting down grinding some games, leveling up weapons, whatever the case may be, they got the energy tubs, they got the cans, tons of different flavors, so a little bit of something for everyone there. If you're ever interested in picking up anything at all from the G Fuel site, be sure to throw in code WHosImmortal at checkout, and it'll get you a nice little discount. The link for that will be down in the description below. Then we get into a handful of very strange but welcomed buffs. The mini Bach actually got buffs, quite a few of them. Long range and close range buffs. It also got a mid-range buff and multiple modifier buffs. So it's gonna kill quicker and it's got better range. I think it's probably more of a mediocre SMG now as opposed to being a completely below average and kind of useless SMG, but it's not going to be anything all that crazy. I'd like to get it in between the pistols. There we go. It's still not going to have a fast TTK in the close range, which is what matters most, and it still falls off pretty quickly. But it's better than it was before. Quite frankly, before it probably could have been in garbage. And, having it in below average was kind of generous. We also saw a slight update to the Vel 47. This ended up getting a long range buff and then also a mid damage buff as well. I still think this is a more competitive SMG than it is a top tier SMG. Really, the SMG that gets the most beneficial buff here is the Vaznev. This is the closest SMG we had to pushing towards those MW3 ones, MW2 SMG that is, and it ended up getting a mid and then a minimum damage buff, so its mid-range and its longer range got damage buffs, and then also just a general max range buff as well, something that I do think actually brings it up into the top tier. This can easily compete with the Swarm, with the AMR9, things like the rival, the HMR. The Vaznev is right there now, which is definitely very cool to see as well. Then also the P90 ended up getting a slight min damage buff and then also a mid damage buff, so again helping out in like the more sniper support style areas, but overall kind of similar to the MP7, and then maybe even a little bit of the mini Bach. Its closest range just isn't all that crazy yet. I think the Vaznev and then the Vel are the two that stand out the most from that, with the Vaznev really being the largest takeaway from those changes. Now the Bruin ended up getting a max range buff, which is kind of an interesting change considering max range is the close range and the Bruin's not necessarily a run and gun option. It's an LMG, so it's slow and it's heavy, even with like the 60 rounder. So it's nice that it got a buff, but it's not a buff that's gonna have a huge impact on where you're probably using this weapon the most. We also saw a slight nerf to the Holger 26, our main meta LMG. Its lower torso got a slight nerf there, so again, it's going to require accuracy to the upper body. I'd say that's probably something that is going to bring it more fringe top tier absolute meta. It still is going to have a pretty consistent TTK though if you're accurate with it, and it's not too hard to be accurate with, so we'll give it the benefit of the doubt. We'll leave it in absolute meta for now, but I do think it's one that is bordering more top tier now for sure. Now the Pelum Yacht's probably overdue for a top tier increase here because it's been on the come up for a little while now, and it ended up getting a max range buff and then an arm multiplier buff as well. I still think the conversion kit's the way to go with this thing, but across the board the Pelum Yacht's feeling very good, very easy, and pretty consistent in terms of TTK right now. We also saw a slight buff to the Evolver with its leg modifier. That's not going to be a super significant update, but it's slightly better than it was before, just statistically there. The one that I care a lot more about is the Eradicator buff. This one got a significant long range buff and then also a max damage range buff as well, so this thing's going to be even more lethal. The fact that its first damage range is so good and now that it's even better over long range really is close to that. I think it's probably the standout from the top tier area, and especially the LMGs right now. There's a lot of really good builds for this too, whether you're going iron sights and whatnot, so the Eradicator has been one that I've really liked for some time, and that's definitely a solid buff to it that helps out. It's just general competitiveness across the board. And then just a couple of one-off ones here to close things out. The Reclaimer got a semi-auto rate of fire buff, so it'll be a little bit quicker to spam there. I think this one's probably going to be a better contender once we have the akimbo options later on this season. And then also the Core 45 pistol ended up getting a fire rate nerf, and it's actually pretty drastic. I think we're going to drop that one down more into the general pistol area. But while we're talking about pistols, we got to bring the stingers up. They have the craziest TTK in the close range, but you have to be using akimbo, and for that reason I think it sort of limits it from being absolute meta because you're so limited in your range where these are actually effective. And obviously you can hip fire only, there's no ADS, so it's definitely checked a little bit, but the TTK is crazy. That said, this update was very productive, all things considered. Maybe sub the super changes. We've got a very competitive absolute meta and top tier category right now. You can pick and choose between all these weapons and you're gonna have a good time. And quite frankly, there's a lot of really strong competitive options too, all things considered. So that's how the current meta plays out here in season 5. That's gonna wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like. And if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out as well, so you can guarantee you're always up to date with everything going on in COD. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.